To understand Myanmar today, we first need to be clear about what has happened throughout the last 5 years. So we need to go back to February 1st, 2021, the day the military junta seized power and overthrew the country's democratically elected government. The military, known as the Damado, under the command of Min Aung Hlaing, detained State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win Myint, declared a state of emergency, and took control of the country. Overnight, the country was pulled out of a fragile democratic transition and placed back under full military rule. In the weeks that followed, millions of people across the country took to the streets in peaceful protest. Civil servants, teachers, doctors, and students joined what became known as the Civil Disobedience Movement, or CDM. Their demands were quite simple: the release of detained leaders and the restoration of democracy. What followed was state violence on a nationwide scale the country had not seen in decades. Security forces opened fire on unarmed protesters. Arbitrary arrests became routine. People were detained without due process, often in night raids, often without their families knowing where they were taken. Reports of torture, sexual violence, and deaths in custody began to emerge. The coup was widely condemned by the United Nations and international leaders, but beyond statements and resolutions, there was little concrete action. As the crackdown intensified, ousted lawmakers and opposition figures formed the National Unity Government, a shadow government in exile. The NUG later announced the creation of the People's Defense Force, calling for armed resistance against military rule. Many civilians, after months of peaceful protest met with lethal force and systematic repression, began taking up arms themselves, forming or joining local PDF groups across the country. As resistance grew over the years, so did the violence. Entire villages burned, massacres documented across multiple regions, airstrikes carried out in civilian areas. The regime reinstated the death penalty, a punishment that had not been enforced since the 1980s, and also introduced mandatory military conscription, forcing young, able-bodied men and women into a fight the military is desperate to win. Millions of people were forced to flee their homes, becoming internally displaced within their own country. For CDM workers, pro-democracy activists, and all those who openly opposed military rule, daily life became a question of safety and survival. And all of this unfolded alongside a series of overlapping disasters. Myanmar went through a COVID-19 pandemic in 2021, Cyclone Mocha in 2023, and a devastating earthquake in 2025, all within the span of 5 years. Each crisis compounded the next, placing even more strain on a population already living under extreme pressure. When I look at what Myanmar is going through, what's heartbreaking is not just the violence or the unimaginable loss of human life. It's that this is happening in a land so deeply shaped by the Buddha's teachings. You see, Theravada Buddhism entered the country through the Bali Canon, transmitted via Sri Lanka and the legacy of Emperor Ashoka, and was later firmly established during the Bagan era, where it became deeply embedded into Burmese culture, ethics, and social identity. So Myanmar is not just a Buddhist country in name. It has also been one of the great living centers of Vipassana, of direct insight into suffering, impermanence, and non-self. This is the land that gave rise to meditation masters and teachers like Ledi Sayadaw, Mahasi Sayadaw, and Siaji U Ba Khin, whose work later reached the world through figures like Essen Goenka. And yet, alongside this lineage, something deeply disturbing has taken root. Today, some who wear the holy robes openly distort the Buddha's teachings, turning the Dhamma into superstition, astrology, and ritual appeasement. There are monks who openly propagate ultranationalism, hatred, and religious supremacy, targeting ethnic minorities while claiming moral superiority through their robes. And that's what makes this moment so painful, because this blatant distortion is not coming from outside Buddhism. It is coming from within. Buddhism is destroying Buddhism. 5 years later, Myanmar is exhausted, traumatized, fragmented. As of this moment, over 30,000 people have been arrested since the coup, with more than 22,000 still in detention. At least 7,700 people have been verified as killed, with thousands more deaths still under verification, including women and children. And this is not the first time the country has lived under dictatorship. Myanmar has known repression, censorship, and fear before. But what feels different now is the duration and the depth. This is not a single crackdown or a contained uprising. It is prolonged, unresolved, and layered on top of economic collapse, displacement, and disaster. The Buddha was very clear about something important. Suffering does not automatically make people wiser or kinder. Most of the time, it does the opposite. When fear is constant, anger grows easily. When justice feels impossible, hatred can feel justified. This is one of the most dangerous parts of long-term violence, not just what it destroys externally, but what it does to the mind. When violence becomes normal, cruelty starts to feel reasonable. If suffering is met only with rage, then suffering reproduces itself. It doesn't end. So when I look at Myanmar today, I don't just see a humanitarian crisis. I see a psychological and moral one that will shape the country long after the guns fall silent, if they ever do.